Good evening, everybody. It's so good to see so many of you. As usual, let us begin our Dharma talk today by reciting the mantra of the universe in its purity, Om Nam, 7 times. Today's talk begins with a very important concept, which is the title, Keeping Ourselves on the Path. Last time we talked about how we begin. We begin with a question. This question ultimately leads us to practicing. And our experiences can be many kinds. Sometimes we feel good during meditation, sometimes we feel bad. Sometimes we feel that the world actually operates in the way that the Dharma teaches us. And sometimes we have the impression that there is no order in the universe, there is no justice, that there is actually nothing to get and there's everything to lose. In those times, it is really important to keep our original direction. And the key word of keeping ourselves on the path is never losing the original purpose, the original vision that we had when we got started. In other words, do not let the energy of your question run out. Do not let the light of your practice be extinguished by some karma which appears. Kosunim said, karma is like malaria. It strikes on alternate days. So you do not know what kind of practice experience you will have. And ultimately, which can help you grow and which can help us develop some really long-lasting and adult wisdom, is the fact that anything which appears in your mind will eventually disappear. Anything which you can see, hear, taste, smell, touch or think is impermanent. So it cannot control you. Even the strongest dualistic thinking, the most extreme emotion, is subject to causes and conditions. So how could it be an absolute force in your life? How could it alter your practice if you have what we call patient endurance? Yumagosa or Vimalakirti talks about this patient endurance even in the Buddha's time. Because after a while, especially after the first couple of years of practice, there's not much happening. There's not much kind of a fireworks inside your consciousness. But you still have to come back to the cushion. You still have to explain to yourself why you are practicing, why you are putting time and energy and commitment into it. And keeping ourselves on the path is pretty much like enduring. I'm not talking about these big, bright, flashy experiences which people can become so much attached to. I'm talking about letting go of all these experiences. In fact, one of the most worrying signals in somebody's practice is the thought, I got it. Getting something is not a problem. The I is the problem. So, if an experience appears, no matter how flashy and wonderful or terribly disturbing and depressing it is, you should really ask yourself, was it there yesterday? Will it be there tomorrow? So anything which appeared will eventually disappear. But our practicing has a very important result. Over time, this mirror is becoming more and more clear. From the outside, it may seem that we are actually losing many things. I mentioned this old Taoist wisdom earlier. Good teaching is bitter, correct path seems to be leading backwards. And that sentence was done without any hypocrisy, without any wishful thinking, without any attachment to names or forms or ideas. Because that's what happens. You believe in your ego as something solid, and it turns out to be completely relative. Then you lose this belief in your solid I. It's a little bit like physicists. They thought this is solid. And then they looked closer, oops, there are atoms. They looked even closer, oops, there are even smaller little things than atoms. And it turns out that if you go even closer, there's nothing solid. Nothing solid. In fact, they just found that 0.001% of matter is, everything else is energy. Everything else. Okay? So, when you truly attain that form is emptiness, that any kind of form, any kind of notion, any kind of idea returns to emptiness, then this kind of experience is not pleasant. Let's be frank. It's not pleasant because you thought about something, some fixed qualities, some inherent characteristics, something which would kind of shore up your existence. And suddenly, as if you had to walk on water and you can't even swim. Okay? So this is not easy, and the only thing which can keep you on the path is the original question: where do life and death come from? Where does suffering, the cause, the end, the way to end come from? What is our job in the universe? And that's what the Buddha did. That's exactly what the Buddha did. He was not satisfied with the teaching of his yoga teachers and Indian philosophy teachers, and he didn't let his question go out. He didn't let his thirst for ultimate realization and liberation be extinguished. So this endurance with which you can endure your disappointment. Sometimes you are disappointed, with your teacher or teachers. Sometimes you are disappointed in these books because you want to find something, but it just feels like sawdust as you read page after page, and you're looking for something and you don't seem to find it. Or you are disappointed with your fellow practitioners because they don't come. You come, but they don't come. They don't appear. You want to practice together, but they're just not there. Is it familiar? It happens all the time. So then the most important is how you keep your mind. If you know truly about the nature of existence here on this planet, you will not be depressed. You will not be kind of cast down. You will not lose heart. Because you know that the amount of energy you put into your practice, that's the amount of energy that's coming back from it as a result. There's no mistake about that. So if you put water or wonderful tea into this, then a little while later, 15 minutes, half an hour, a decade, a lifetime, 2, 3 lifetimes, a mahakapa, you can drink it. If you put energy into your practice, it's never lost. That's number one. Never lost. But if you give up and you give rise to dualistic thinking and you start to follow your karma, it seems at first it may seem as a relief. Finally, I have something. Or finally, I have someone. Or finally, I have a kind of more attainable goal, something closer which I can realize. It's not as far as enlightenment and saving all beings from suffering. But you've lost your focus. You have lost your vision. You have lost something which you held as most important, and now it becomes second, third, and soon fall down to 100 and even below. So, last time we mentioned what is most important. We really have to know that and act upon these priorities very clearly. It's clear we have to live our lives. It's clear we have to earn our living. It's clear we have to relate to our fellow human beings, whether they are family or not. But what is most important? You find that, you keep that up, and it will help you stay on the path no matter what happens. Not only monks and nuns, but also lay people, they have made noticeable and heroic effort to keep up the tradition and to keep the practicing spirit alive, especially during hard times, when there was war, when there were conquests, when there was famine, and it was really not so easy to live, let alone practice. Now, modern society, and that includes Korea, faces another challenge. This challenge is not personal. Nobody tells you not to practice, but you face the challenge of 10,000 distractions. Not one person trying to hinder you, block access to that gate, or telling you not to practice. But there are 10,000 distractions from what you can see, from what you can hear, what you can read. So the mind keeps itself occupied with what we say relative content. You always have something to see or hear or think about or to enjoy or to hate. This world called the modern world, the post-industrial world, the information-based world, whatever we call it, has given us new challenge. And this new challenge is that you can keep yourself occupied always, all the time, 24/7. And those who are addicted to information, there are quite a few thousand of them in this world, they are already in clinics. They are addicted to mind content. So much so that other areas of their lives, sometimes even such simple thing as feeding themselves or keeping themselves clean, that suffers. That's not functioning because they are so much attached to mind objects or the flow of consciousness. And they put always some digital information in there. They always eat something with their intellect, and then they are happy. But they are addicts. They suffer. They don't function in life. So that's the new challenge. We can be addicted to information. So much so as for any controlled substance, which is chemical. So this kind of life which we are living now is so loaded with information that they made a survey and they found out that in 1 week's issue of a thick daily paper, you can take any daily paper in America, in Europe, in Asia, and you collect the daily paper's very thick issues for 1 week, and that's exactly the amount of information that people had to digest 200 years ago in a lifetime. And we haven't evolved so much in our brains. So no matter how much we try to make things better, this kind of information ocean is right here before us, and we have to manage it. Our brain didn't become significantly more powerful. So the 10,000 distractions require one clear direction and really, really endurance inside. Okay? Otherwise, we cannot keep our appointments, cannot keep our promises, cannot keep our lives straight, and before we know it, for no reason, for no visible impact, our life corrupts. And when that happens, everybody is unhappy and nobody knows why. So keep the mind, which is on the path to attaining clarity, liberation, and also trying to liberate other beings. When you have an enemy, you can either conquer, be conquered, or make a truce. It's clear, right? Because it's visible. Sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's impersonal, like a thing or a machine. But in this world, there is no enemy. There's just this immense amount of information which you can be attached to, which sometimes manipulates you to a certain purpose, like consumption, or some dualistic thinking, think this way, think that way, believe this, believe that. But all of this distracts you and takes you away from the path. Remember when we talked about don't know mind. Don't know has no thinking, has no eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind. So there's nothing to see, hear, taste, smell, touch and think. It's in the Heart Sutra, remember that. When you read the Heart Sutra first, it's so alien compared to the rest of the world which you know. When you read it, it's really not understandable. I remember my first experience, the kind of understandable part was the gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisva, because at least that was in Sanskrit and you could understand that. But the rest was in English. It was in legible, beautiful, wonderful English. But the spirit, the mindset of that sutra, which is really about not identifying with anything, not attaching to anything, not making anything, etc., etc., is really alien compared to the rest of the world. And yet, when you recognize the significance of our practice, you will keep it no matter what. And this no matter what is something that I have to underline. No matter what happens, you keep your mind clear. Whether you can practice formally or not, whether you are ordained or a layperson, doesn't matter. You keep your mind clear. And once you realize how much we are connected mentally, that your mind is really not locked up in this skull, and it really has a deep impact on the world and other people, you attain what we call responsibility. And that's the second important concept after endurance. Endurance and responsibility. When we attain our responsibility, we will never ever want things go worse than they were before. And that means we somehow keep up our practicing effort, whatever the reaction is, inside or outside. It's a little bit like that cat which is waiting for the mouse before the mouse hole, and there are many people walking on the same corridor or the room, and they kick the cat, they tease the cat, they grab the tail of the cat, they pull it, but the cat just focuses on the mouse hole and doesn't do anything. Sometimes he's but not move, stays there. So practicing is really that simple. If you fall asleep and wake up with the same question, soon your mind becomes straight. And sometimes when you are involved in your daily activities, you really have to just stop for a moment, gain some insight into what you are doing in that moment, and wake up to cause and effect in that moment. That is right here, right now. And that helps. We spend sometimes 2-3 hours a day commuting on various means of transportation. And if you look at it, people are bored or reading, listen to their phones, talk through their phones, typing SMS, read the paper, watch online movies, all these. So they have to keep their minds occupied. What are you doing as a practitioner? So if you have a chance to practice inside, why not? It's idle time otherwise. So you don't have to deal with the crowd around you. It's just as impersonal, you know, as the inside of a computer when you have no specific relationship in a crowd. It's an environment which is like the forest. There are trees, but no special relationship to them. You enter the subway, there are 10,000 people, and you can, oh my God, how do I get to Chumoro from here? Oh my God, it's really crowded, but no special relationship to anybody. So you go with the flow, you stay in that situation, but you keep your practicing mind. If you do a Yonggul, you keep your Yonggul, you keep your Kwansan Bosa. Or if you have a question, you just do that, or you perceive the sound. There is no moment lost when you think like this, and when you try it like this. I remember 12 years ago, it was exactly 12 years ago, when my parents had a chance to visit Wagyesa. They came to Korea, they met my masters and Master Sung-san and Yokam Kunsanin at Shinwon-sak, Yayong-san, and that was a very happy half an hour when they were talking. My dad spoke English, so they could talk with Sung-san Slim directly, and I was just observing. And that observation was actually fantastic. And when my father saw the schedule that we follow, every Hangul, Doangul, so winter kloche, summer kloche, he looked at me with this complete amazement. He says, "You guys are doing this for 90 days?" I said, "Yes, Dad, of course, we are doing it." He says, "This must be terribly boring." Then I asked him, "Dad, you know, if I tell you that I never had a single bored moment in my entire meditation practice, would you believe me?" He said, he looked at me, "No." And I said, "Because you never tried." Of course, he's not the kind of shy man. He wasn't at all. So yes, so what if I tried? I said, "Yeah, you would be very surprised." And then, you know, he was a very strong scientist, so he didn't believe in anything spiritual, you know. So he told me that if you cannot explain to me, it doesn't exist. If you cannot prove it, it's not true. For him it was very hard, that there's something beyond any reason, there's something beyond any thinking which is not religious. On my mother's side, there was my uncle, who was an Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist. For 30, 40 years he was teaching, preaching, helping other people also. For him also, Zen practice was truly unthinkable. When I returned from Korea, he saw our Zen center schedule. He came and visited us in the hope that I may kind of change my mind. He's a very good man, he doesn't try to convert me, he's a very good man. But he still looked at our Zen center schedule in Budapest and says, "What are you doing, every morning and evening?" I said, "Uncle, we just try to keep our hearts clear, keep our minds focused, etc." And then he asked me, "Do you have to believe in something? Do you believe in Buddha, or do you worship the statue?" I said, no, we don't do that. This Buddha statue is just a reminder. That's it." He said, "Then what do you have to believe in?" And I told him, "Yeah, if we have to believe in something, then we say that the sky is blue and the trees are green." then he said, "But that's not a belief." And I said, "Uncle, Buddhism is not really a religion, it's a path." What is it? What kind of path is that? And I said, "It's a path to awakening, to what we truly are and what this world is." Then he says, then he says, "It's unlike anything I heard in Europe." So I was surrounded by very good people, but you should see that, our Chamson Bulge is not a religion, it's not a science, and it's not some kind of philosophy. It's a third experience of this kind of not understanding but keeping our kind of mind and direction clear, was at the university. So I was invited 2 years after I returned to Europe to teach at the Asiatic department of the ELTE University, and I taught for 1 semester. The second semester was given to a co-teacher, and I had a lot of smart students. And they thought that if they are smart, that gives them the license not to learn what they have to learn, and not to know this very thin little book, which is the root text of the Compass of Zen. It's not the thick, big Compass of Zen, it's just the root text, with Daeson Salim's Chinese characters. Altogether it's about 50 pages. So it's not such a big deal to learn during 1 semester. But they thought that if they philosophize about the Dharma, if they give me some really intelligent opinion on the Dharma, they can disregard the basics, they can disregard the structure. And then I said to this extremely smart guy, I said, "Look, you are smarter than most people I have ever seen, but you don't know what you need to know. And you are invited to practice if you want to attain what these concepts are about. The problem is you don't even know the concepts. You just know how to play with your thinking." So philosophy comes from 2 Greek terms, philos, which means the love or acceptance, and sophos, which is wisdom or thinking. In Greek, wisdom and thinking used to be the same. So the love of thinking is philosophy. Now our practicing is not about that. So when you practice, you have to rule out any misconceptions about what we are doing. That's why I'm quoting all these opinions and all these reflections. So practicing is not science, it's not a religion, and it's not philosophy. It's experiencing something beyond time and space, any kind of dualistic thinking, anything that you can hear, see, taste, smell, touch, or think about. And this kind of understanding is enough. Everything else is up to you. And whether it's fast, it's really truly awkward to talk about something in our practice as fast. There's nothing fast. Also, there's nothing slow. When you practice and you keep your mind clear, it doesn't matter how many Mahakalpas pass. You keep your effort up. And that's it. It doesn't matter whether somebody goes and says, "Oh, you are enlightened, you're such a good person." It doesn't matter. Okay. Also, it doesn't matter when they say, "You practice for 20 years, you're such an ignorant animal." That also doesn't matter. Did you put 20 years into practicing or not? That's the question. Did you sincerely try to go to the right direction or not? That's what matters. And if such negative opinion appears, you can always say, oh, please teach me. And, how can I teach this guy? So then what's the problem? Okay? So really trust yourself. Discard your ego, but trust yourself. And trust that the Buddhas and the patriarchs proved with their lives, with their efforts, with their teaching, that the Dharma is valid. It's not something provisional. It's not something maybe true. It's something 100% functional and operational. So if you connect to that, if you attain that, if you lose your own opinions, your own preconceptions, your own like and dislike mind, you can become one. You can attain our substance. You can see the truth. And you can function correctly as a human being. One key word is that it's more simple than we think. So no matter how much you think about a strategy, no matter how much you want to kind of pave out or predict the path that you take, you cannot. You can only predict one thing, that now I try. That's all you can do. Now I try. And that's why the Buddha said at the end of his life, this world is on fire. Try, try, try endlessly. Or he said, strive and endlessly. So that means this whole world is completely impermanent, including our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, everything which appears in your consciousness. Everything. That's why strive or try as much as you can. And you know, we may be sorry or frustrated or frightened that one day we have to go from this earth, from our form, as it is today. But let me quickly reassure you, it's the single best invention next to birth. So if there's birth, there has to be death. Without it, it just doesn't work. What if everybody who was born here would be staying here on earth? And it would be pretty tight and boring and really, really ugly after a while. Can you believe that you would meet somebody who's 20,000 years old and say, huh, you're much younger than me? It doesn't work. So impermanence is not bad. Where there's life, there's death. Where there's birth, there's decay and passing. We have to accept that, and actually, by accepting it, we have to use our time to the best extent we can. And if you do not lose focus, if you don't lose heart, if you keep up your practice, then we say you go straight. That's the meaning of only go straight. Not look left or right, up or down. Not follow some dualistic emotion. Not think that, oh, this person's right, this person's wrong. I heard this, so I do that. I heard something else, so I do the other thing. No. That means you go around, around, around. Always follow good and bad, right and wrong. I want, I don't want, all these things. Going straight means no matter what. Okay? So is responsibility. These two concepts are primarily important to see that our practices is not just for us. It's really for this world. It's really for all beings. Now, I would like to take any questions from all of you, from the audience, if you have any. Yes?
Actually, I'm the one who sent the email about veganism. So would you please share your thinking about veganism?
Sure. So the question was, what should we say about being vegan? I mean, vegan is a pretty tight diet, and you might correct me, but it means you only eat completely, I would say, non-animal products. Not even indirectly related to animals like cheese or milk or anything like that. So it's a very strict vegetarian diet as opposed to the lacto-vegetarian diet where you eat milk products because you don't have to kill for that, you just take the product of the animal. So it's something which the Buddha and the patriarchs did not do. have to quickly put that on the table. The Buddha accepted meat if it was offered and the animal was not specifically killed for him or for any other bhikkhus. And he left it as such to posterity, that you can accept this kind of precious offering if this killing didn't happen for you. And later on, as Mahayana Buddhism grew, we tried to restrain ourselves from killing, because in the Buddha's time the Sangha was not so big. But as Buddhism grew and there were millions and millions and millions of Buddhists, even though the animals were not specifically killed for them, it would involve millions and millions of animals, you know. So it's good to decrease that. And there is another wisdom which was left to us by many practitioners, that you may think that it's important what goes into your body, but it's even more important what comes out of your mind. So many people who actually made pretty bad karma, they were vegetarians. So not eating meat or not eating dairy does not guarantee anything except two things. It guarantees that you do not make this lifetime bad karma to animals because you don't kill them. That's number one. Number two, you do not overload your system with meat or sometimes with milk products that will make your mind heavy and your body more contaminated. Most colon cancers come from these heavy meat eaters. Okay? So there are two very important benefits. You don't kill animals, thereby you improve your karma and your relationship to life. And you do not contaminate your body and mind, which is also truly important. So it's a very respectable thing. However, we should see its own limitations. I'm saying this, I've been vegetarian for the better part of my life, since age 19. I had to find out that my body doesn't tolerate meat. Now later on I said, that's wonderful. I don't have to kill animals or being related to killing. That's great. So I haven't eaten meat since then, unless there was a in your food, because sometimes in Asia it happens that I ask, yacheshi, of course yacheshi. Then it comes out and says, oh, that's a little ham in it. That's not meat. So that happens sometimes. So that's not the point. The point is that you do not intentionally kill animals for your well-being. Why? Well, there is a little story here. Everybody at least understands societies that were before modern civilization, and we know about their hunting rituals. When they hunt their totem animals, like a big bear in Siberia, or reindeer in the north, or bull or bison in America, they sometimes do these special rituals. And for 1 or 2 days, in Siberia sometimes even for 3 days, they don't touch the dead animal, and they ask for his forgiving. They sing many kinds of ritual songs, and they have drummings and all these things. You may wonder, were these people just ignorant or superstitious? And if you go deeper, you find, no. They actually had a very deep wisdom, which was largely lost or incorporated into other teachings later, that the mind of the animal is seeking revenge after he or she is killed. And that's a fact. No one wants to die. So when you kill an animal, that animal mind is looking for revenge. And that's why there were all these rituals to take this vengeance mind away. When somebody human passes away, it's not so clear what happens, at least not to most of us, what happens after death. Especially what happens to that person, but we chant. We chant Jijang Bosa most of the time, or Amitabha if he was Zen master. We chant Jijang Bosa because we want to send this energy of original vow or human path to that person. So with an animal, we those people who kill animals, and they had some spiritual insight, they had to do something because they saw that the animal mind or animal spirit came back and tried to control. And when that happens, people's mind quality really become low, and they get disturbed. and they get all kinds of problems, you know. So there are many tales about this which should be cleared away, and if you examine these old rituals very clearly, then you see the substance in all of them. There's a common point in all of these, I would say, pre-modern civilizations, and if you look at what they did, they always did the same thing. They wanted to take away opposites. So by killing, you make opposites. Very strong opposites. It's called death and revenge. Death and revenge. Okay? And that's why the Buddha said, no animal sacrifice. He said it for some other reason too, because you know, you can actually send that animal spirit to do something for you. Or you can offer an animal spirit to a higher being. Okay? You just have to go into a sanshingak somewhere in the countryside and you can see many things, you know. So it's really interesting that the Buddha taught that, because whether we look at it as good or bad karma, it definitely causes suffering. Further, it's a very relative karma, which means you don't get enlightenment by sacrificing animals. Never. Or doing rituals where animal killings are involved. Never. So you only cause suffering without any other benefit, which would maybe outweigh that suffering. There's no such equation, of course, which would rationalize causing suffering to other people. But it's equally clear that by killing, we make very strong dualistic karma, which has to be taken away. That's why it's very good to refrain from that. But by itself, we don't get anything else, just some good karma. We don't get enlightenment by that. But we can keep our lifestyle, we can keep our direction, we can keep our relationship to other sentient beings very good. It's super. So if somebody can refrain from eating meat because your body doesn't yearn for it so much, and you don't feel always hungry or things like that, it's very good to do it. Now, concerning discarding dairy and all that, and being completely vegan, I can tell you, some people's bodies need cheese and yogurt and milk and all this, and some people don't. There is no good or bad here. You should really know what makes your body function. Okay? Some cars need diesel, some cars need just petrol, and some other engines, they need kerosene. So you have to find out what's good for you. And if you keep your relationship to other beings clear, then everything's going to be all right. So you should see the merits and limitations also of being vegan. It doesn't give your mind anything special, just these two benefits which I mentioned, but these are big enough to actually do it. But don't give other human beings a hard time because you're vegan. Don't think you're special because you're vegan. Don't think you attain anything beyond these two benefits that I mentioned. So it's a relative thing. It's a very, very beneficial thing. But we should see very clearly cause and effect as we do such kind of rigorous diet. Okay. You're welcome. More questions? Yes.
My question is about Anna. Anna is the earliest side person of Buddha, but he never made trouble with religion. Made any trouble. How is it possible?
Do you mean Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant for most part of his life? And you say he never made any trouble. And you ask how this is possible. Well, some people just have the character of not making any problems. It's very good for attendant. You know, not so much thinking, not so much desire for himself, not so much anger towards other people, so no problem. He was really this tape recorder for the Buddha. He could really memorize those texts. It was really remarkable what he did. But we should also remember that in old Indian society, where the Buddha was born, they had a special recital techniques of the Vedic scriptures. It's called permutation. So they have a sequence of syllables, and they memorize it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 until the end, and they memorize it as 10, 9, 8, 7, completely the way back. Then they have permutations as they started to replace 1 to 4, 4 to 8, then 2 to 5, 5 to 9, etc. It was immense. So this technique to memorize something was very, very developed. Okay. And Ananda must have had some past experience with this, because his memory was impeccable. Of course, he didn't watch television, he didn't watch movies, he didn't watch anything else. There was no internet, there was no radio, there was no television. So his mind really wasn't occupied. So the only broadcast he had was from the Buddha. Buddha channel. So he was completely recording everything. But all this retentive memory does not really mean that he was a fully attained being. In fact, when they invited him after the Buddha's passing into the council, Mahakashyapa said, "I'm sorry, only fully realized arahants can come in." And Ananda wasn't. So as to kind of, so what should we do? He remembers everything and he's not allowed in. So Mahakashyapa and the other elder bhikkhus, they kind of talked and said, okay, send him up to the mountain for a week, give him some really hard Yongmen-Junjin, and if he makes it, then he can get in. So the story with Ananda goes like this. He was standing on his toes for 1 week. And it's pretty hard to believe. I mean, try to stand on your toes just for 1 hour. Not for 1 week, for 1 hour. I don't know how he did it. It was a really austere practice. Maybe if you keep hop chung and your kind of legs and feet completely become like stone, you can do it, and then you focus. But I must suspect that there was some yoga exercise which we don't know about. That there were other aspects of this practice which was never told and never put down. Because if you look at the sutras, they never talk about the technique of practicing. Never. You have to learn that from a living teacher. It's just recent that we started to put techniques in writing. Okay? So he goes up there, and the condition was that when he comes down, he has to enter the council without touching the door. That was the condition. So after 1 week, he comes down, and he enters the council where all the other arahants were without touching the door. What that actually meant, we also don't know. We don't know. But they accepted him after this 1 week of hard practice, and he could use this super memory to actually put down or start to transmit the Buddha's teaching, because it's also not clear when it was actually put into writing. Whether it was right after the Buddha passed away, or there were other people like Ananda and they just memorized, but at the latest, 400 years after the Buddha died, the first canon was ready, stamped and verified. Maybe just a couple of years later. There are many versions, many interpretations of this, and for us Zen practitioners, it's very, very secondary. It doesn't matter when those writings were put down. Because the first principle of Zen says, do not depend on the scriptures. So what does it matter for us, really? So Ananda was a very, very interesting person. And the fact that he didn't have trouble with anybody doesn't mean that he sometimes wasn't frustrated. So we're all humans. And when somebody does something great, we remember that. We don't remember the weak or the kind of darker side of that person. But just living in a monastery strictly for 6 years and living in a kind of temple under construction for the last 2 years tells me that it's almost impossible for an attendant of a great master not to have a problem with someone. Okay. More questions? Yes.
Now when we got into Buddha's first disciples, this is not, oh well, maybe this is a question.
It had better be.
Yes, I hope. So Kashyapa, I just got curious that, okay, we know, or I do know about Kashyapa that he smiled.
And he's what?
He smiled when the Buddha held the flower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He actually smiled.
Yeah, the smiling is the only thing I actually know about him. So can you, what's your impression of Kashyapa?
Very good. My impression of Mahakashyapa is very good. Okay, so he actually went to the Buddha rather late in his life, so his body age was a little old when he became monk. But he was a fire yogi before, and he could actually do some magic. Not as big as Mahamoggallana or Magdalayana, but Mahakashyapa also had a little bit of horsepower, you know, in his tanjo. So it was really clear that his maturity grants him the first patriarchal position. This kind of maturity was unlike the other 1,000, who is kind of looking at the Buddha when he raised the flower. Mind to mind, he understood, he perceived, so he smiled. If he speaks, it's out. If he just stays silent, not understanding, not comprehending, out. So he bridged the gap, you know, with just one smile. Beautiful, you know. The Buddha didn't have to convince Mahakashyapa of anything. Mahakashyapa didn't have to prove anything. It's brilliant. It's elegant. It's wonderful. There were two more occasions actually when this kind of transmission happened. The Buddha was sitting before the pagoda of many children, and Mahakashyapa was approaching, and he was a little bit late. So as a younger monk, he should have sat behind the bhikkhus, even behind older novices. But as he came, the Buddha just moved a little bit over, and he saw that. And he came straight up, and he sat right next to the Buddha. I mean, even now in this very much kind of modern society, this would be unthinkable. In Korean Buddhism, I cannot imagine any Zen master who would tolerate this. Unless there would be somebody like Mahakashyapa. So that meant that your Buddha nature, my Buddha nature, same Buddha nature. You can sit at the same rank as I do if you attain to the same thing as I did. That's what the Buddha said. Actually demonstrated with this kind of, you know, emancipation. This is a really important point. So he passed that too. And then the last one was after the Buddha passed away. And again, there was no telegram, there was no email at that time, so it took time for people to come to the funeral. The Buddha had been in the coffin for about 3 days by the time Mahakashyapa arrived. And he walked around the coffin 3 times, and he hit the coffin 3 times, and as the third hit landed on the coffin, the Buddha's feet appeared outside the coffin. So that's why on the walls of some Taeungjeon, you can see that kind of short coffin and long legs, you know, sticking out. And that's that kind of event. Now, this last one we don't have to believe so much. Of course, it can be used as a demonstration that the Buddha's body can die, but the mind never dies. But he had proven that way before he passed away. And this is the kind of mythical layer, similar to the Buddha's birth, that as he was born, he walked 7 steps, lotus, open, point up, down, under the sky, in the face of the earth, only I am holy. This is one of the worst sentences he could have said right at the outset. So probably it didn't happen. Also, after is that this kind of demonstration which would put people's minds into this kind of miraculous state probably didn't happen, especially because during his life the Buddha scolded students who did magic. If you do strong Arahant practice, you can do magic after a while, but that's what we call earth magic. It's involving substance like name and just forms. Like there was a story of one of the Buddha students who was begging, and he was using the restroom in this house where he was begging, and they put his bowl up in a very high place. Actually, it was the entrance of an attic space, and they took away the ladder. And it was like 1 story high. And then they said, well, Venerable, if you can take your bowl, begging bowl off from that high position, we give you extra food. We'll truly respect you. And then that bhikkhu just looked up, then the bowl started to move, started to descend, and it landed right in his hand. Everybody was totally and absolutely melting inside, because they saw something. And the Buddha heard that. He scolded the student and said, you should have left that house immediately when they had done that to you. Immediately leave. Okay? And the more kind of known story, and I'm sure there are plenty more, was actually with Mahamagdalena or Mahamoggalana. Because the Buddha was meditating not far from him. Magdalena was also meditating, and he perceived that the Kapila kingdom, where the Buddha was born, was going to be devastated by a war. So he runs up to the Buddha and says, hey, Lord, do you see this? Do you see this? Buddha says, yes, of course. Why did you do something? I cannot. You cannot? You are the only enlightened, world honored one. And he used all the names. Whole line of them. And you say you cannot do something, you have no compassion. So he says, okay. He put the entire Kapila kingdom in a small bowl, took it up to Tushita heaven, waited for a week, and then took the bowl down. He opened it. And he saw this miniature kingdom was devastated by a miniature war. Then he runs up to the Buddha again and says, did you know this? And then the Buddha says, yes. And why? I tried everything. Why? And Buddha says, no one can make merited karma disappear. And this needs some explanation. If you are responsible for something, only you can change that. So the Kapila kingdom could have changed it, but they didn't. So they merited some karma which cannot be taken away from the outside. If the decision makers of that kingdom decided on war, or they couldn't kind of reconcile with another kingdom who was going to be attacked, who was going to attack them, then that's what happens. So they merited, they earned some karma, and that's why it happened. So, getting back to Mahakashyapa, one thing is clear. He gave transmission to Ananda. Ananda was the second patriarch. But by that time, Ananda was ripe. So he was ripe enough to later transmit it to, I don't know, Upavutta or somebody. You can look at the chart. But until the 14th, Nagarjuna, there is not much that we remember. We know that it was transmitted. But the 14th, exactly halfway between Buddha and Dharmadesa, or Bodhidharma, who is the 28th, the 14th Nagarjuna is really special. He was A, an enlightened practitioner, B, the best philosopher ever on the face of this earth, and as it was kind of rumored, he was a magician too. So once they asked him to demonstrate clear mind, and he basically turned himself into the full moon on the rostrum, and his speech came from the full moon. His body disappeared. And then, when the speech was over, the moon disappeared and he reappeared. Okay? Don't expect anything like that. So, there are many, many good stories from the Buddha's time, and if you take them in the right way, they can serve as inspiration. Just don't want to save your family by putting it into a small bowl and taking it up to heaven. More questions? Yes, Vijay.
I don't know not for good disciples, but very naughty and troublesome disciples like Madhava. I don't exactly the name, but he killed 999.
Angulimala.
Angulimala, yes. Angulimala.
The serial killer. He was one of the worst. Come on. Most of them get caught after 10, 20, or 50 at the latest. This guy was at 999.
probably very notorious murderer, but why Buddha accepted him as a disciple? So the Buddhist or the faced very big troubles. Why?
Well, those who couldn't handle Angulimala, they faced big trouble. But the Buddha could handle Angulimala for sure. Remember, Angulimala actually wanted to kill him with a knife, and he was running after him. The Buddha was just walking. Angulimala was running like crazy, and he couldn't catch him. Isn't that interesting? Now, we don't know how that happened. We actually are completely unaware of that event. But one thing is absolutely clear. The Buddha's mind was a lot more clear, and a lot more powerful, and a lot more compassionate than Angulimala's consciousness. That's all you need. But if your mind is not stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than someone else's, then that person can control you. Right? So of course he accepted Angulimala because Angulimala needed help. And the Buddha was way, way higher. In fact, that's based on my experience of teaching in prisons, like I said earlier. In Hungarian prisons, I had the privilege to teach for basically 2 half-year periods every 2 weeks. And I met murderers. I met people who were there for life. I met people who committed actually terrible crimes. Their minds are very weak. Their karma is strong. Their minds are weak. I felt really sorry for them. Not that they would have needed it. They needed some teaching, and most of them didn't hear what I was saying. But that's okay. I mean, they heard the words, but they kind of discarded the meaning. And that was also okay, because actually you cannot 100% discard it once you hear it. And I'm trying to forget, but I can't. Because the more they try to forget, the more they remember. So these people had very, very weak center. Strong opposites control them. And because of this strong opposites mind, their true self really has no weight. Too much karma. So if somebody is so centered, like the Buddha was, then a mind like Angulimala is like a little dust compared to a planet. So that's why he could control him without doing anything. That was not a manual control or a mind-to-mind control, that control thinking. No. There's another story. Today is our magic day, so I tell you a story which is actually confirmed, and it's true, because when you hear about magic, especially that happened in the kind of last couple of 100 years, you should always be suspicious that somebody's playing with your mind. Why? So that you would believe in something, okay? But this is actually a true story. Zen Master Sun San, when he was a young Zen master, he stayed with Taoist practitioners up on Korean mountains. And actually, I met the son of this Taoist master. He's now an old monk. And this Taoist master and his friends, they were really kind of bright people. They were living in this really remote area, and they invited Zen Master Sun San. They liked him very much, of course, bright, young, enlightened Zen master, no problem. And suddenly they realized that they don't have enough food. So what can you do if you're a Taoist magician to get food? Well, you can bring it remotely. You can actually bring it from the shop. They didn't make the food, they brought the food. And later when they walked down the mountain, they said sorry to the owner and they paid. But it was possible for them to get it there. But good way of shopping, huh? But actually, there was a precondition before this Taoist master did that. He said to Zen Master Sun San, you go away a little bit, and after half an hour you come back. And this story was actually told us by Zen Master Sun San during our training at Vagyasa. And then we asked, because we were really curious, we said, Katsuni, why did this Taoist master ask you, go away and then come back? Then he said, big waves, control small waves. That's it. That was that. And by the time he returned, there was a table full of the best food you can probably imagine. Okay? I think that answers your question. No magic.
Just before I come here, when I took a shower, there was a pump. And when the power cut, the cold water coming in, I couldn't see anything, and that reminds me the experience of coma 2 years ago. And at that time, my parents thought I was dead, and
your parents thought you were dead?
Yeah.
Why did they think that?
Because I was sick 2 years ago, and I couldn't wake up more than 24 hours, and I felt this is kind of experience of that. And after that, I tried to overcome the fear of the fear of the death, and I attended to the peaceful dying workshop, and I felt I overcome it just a little bit, but today I just realized and noticed that I still fear a lot of my own death, even I can, yeah. So, but even I switch on again and again, it happened more than 10 times. Maybe it's something that's specific, but so I start to think what I am fearing, and more and more I switch on, I feel like I don't fear about the power cut anymore, and I try to be familiar with the dark and something. And so my question is, how can I be more familiar with the death?
Very interesting karma, especially with the bathroom. You use the bathroom where the switch was not properly insulated. I'm being now first a little bit practical, then we get back to your mind and death and life, okay? So when a switch gets moldy inside because the water vapor goes in, and for a time it cannot dry out. So no matter how strongly you switch it back on, the circuit breaker again feels or perceives the short circuit, and it cuts the power so that you wouldn't die. So same, 5 seconds later you turn it back on, it's still wet inside, cut again. So that's about electricity. Now we talk about you. Anybody who has unusual experiences with body and mind, and the function in life is kind of disrupted, diminished, or you have a near-death experience, that's a very good inspiration for practice, isn't it? Yes, it is, because you are never the same as before. So the question for you now is not how to be more familiar with death, but how to be more familiar with life. And to digest that karma, because you are alive and you are getting actually into it, you're not getting out of it. You know? The real practice is not about life and death, but it's about going beyond life and death. And sometimes when you are shocked or when we meet something very, very peculiar, unusual, you just respond very naturally. What was that? Now, that's a good start. Don't call it death. You didn't die. You were near. You were very close. You may have been in some special state of mind and your parents get freaked out. But you didn't die. Otherwise, you wouldn't be looking at me right now. Dying really means mind leaves the body and doesn't return there. Okay? So, it's really important to see that when you practice, you can ask the right question and you can ask the wrong question. If you're attached to any phenomena, then you're asking the wrong question. because you just bump into it and you finish. You may digest that experience, but if you stay with it too long, you cannot go beyond it. So the question is not what happened to me. The question is not how to become more familiar with that, but what is it that goes through all that? What is it that's born and what is it that dies? But these concepts of life and death, it's really empty. Operationally, or kind of speaking in terms of karma, body and mind together, life. Mind without a body, death. Mind getting a body, birth. Mind losing a body, death, or dying. Okay? So these are the two short and the two longer states of existence if you relate them to each other. And we go around all these four states until we stop. So what is it that goes all around? What is it that experiences all this? That is the question I suggest you work with. And over time, as a byproduct of this practice, you digest this experience, you become familiar with life and death, you become kind of at peace with your relationships, with people, and you find your job. You really find your job. We actually do not cultivate the great question because of some outer commandment. We cultivate this because one question takes care of 10,000 others. So if you attain the root of our existence, then everything else which comes out of it is automatically taken care of. This is a very important point. So you don't have to worry about this experience, that experience, this kind of happening, that can happen. No. But you should really see, what is it that goes through it, and ultimately, through this practice, what is it that generates it? And I can tell you right away, what goes through it, what sees it, and what generates it is exactly the same. That's our true self. Okay. And again, this true self has no name, no form, no life, no death, no thinking, no dualities, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. Very important, so that you would never go astray. Okay. So, practice. You have to, otherwise this kind of backseat driver, the past experience, to start to control your life. That's why practicing is important. If I may suggest, Kido, the chanting, very important. Every single day, you, even silently, you just go 10 rounds with the Kwansan Bosal and the Bakpa Yomju, and don't expect anything. Just make your mind very, very kind of fluid and clear and receptive. No more chunks, okay? No more hard karma inside. It makes it very, very fluid, very clear. And then you can work with that, and during sitting meditation, you can keep this clear mirror consciousness very well. Okay?
Yeah, but I start with my day with prostration and some meditation.
Very good.
Yeah, and I try to practice in daily life, but I feel like these days I need more than this.
Very good. Kyocha is coming, or Tuangot is coming. Give yourself a holiday. Go to our temple here, or you can go to America or Europe if you like. You can practice there also. And the road is all open before you. No big hindrance. You know, you have clear senses, you have clear cognition, you don't have physical problems, so go for it. One of the major hindrances when our cognition or senses are not clear, or where we have physical problems, or outside karma hinders us, which we made earlier, like a family problem or some obligation, then we cannot practice. And the other two hindrances, which I want to say once we talk about them, is fear and the brightness of the intellect. So when we are afraid, and when we think that we are so smart that we can kind of smart ourselves out of it, we can substitute action with words, okay? Then we don't practice. And then the other is when we have some damage in our existence, in our being, and the other is external hindrance. These are the fourth. This is the fourth, external hindrance. So way to go. And of course, prostration would have been the next step. You are already doing it. And CASN BELS actually takes away fear. CASN BELS is taking away fear because it breaks down the barrier. It breaks down the wall. So if you can pet a dog, then that dog will not bite you. Okay? More questions?
There's different levels. It seems there's different levels of understanding. Sometimes you think that you understand some Buddhist teaching with your head, and you think that, oh, I understand. But as your life goes on, you realize how shallow that is, and you wonder how I can deepen it so that it can reach the core of my life. Sometimes you're ignorant of how deep it is, and it's a big shock when you realize how shallow that is, and you go to the next step. But is there any landmarks that or is that me wanting the landmark is also a sign of weakness?
A sign of?
Weakness.
Wanting the landmark is not necessarily a sign of weakness. It can be, but it's not necessarily so. We are curious, we want to know, also we want something certain. And this need for certainty is it. Now tell me where I am with my practice. And in Zen we don't do that to people. You know, in some other schools where it's gradual, or they tell you, oh, you are at 25%. Sorry, we don't do that. Because we would give you another ego right away. I am at 25% enlightened. Thank you very much. Tomorrow I give myself a holiday. So it doesn't work like that. You know? So it's really important to see that landmarks first seem to be helpful, but later they become your chain. Exactly. Because you become attached to them and you say, okay, I know this, but I really don't know what happens after that. I suffered a little bit so far, maybe I have to suffer more, so I really don't want to go further. And actually, I'm fine at 25%. So many percent, I'm fine. Why should I practice? And in the first talk I mentioned in this really interesting conversation between Subong Sunim, our late Zen master, whom we are missing very much, and Zen master Sung San. This was a very good story and served as an inspiration for our school. Subong Sunim was doing a 100-day solo retreat in America. And in America, unlike in Korea, you can really disappear. I mean, you can disappear so much that the nearest human settlement is 2 days of walking, or the nearest phone booth is 6 hours of walking. The nearest paved road is sometimes a day and a half or a day. So he did that, and he was really solo retreating, and he had a great time, and you know, he was strong, he did his practice. So around day 60, when he was through and he knew he could do it, he had this thought, it's clear I can do this, so why? It's no longer a challenge. So he walks 6 hours to the nearest phone booth, he drops in a coin, he calls Zen Master Sung Sa, and he says, sir, bowing no problem, chanting no problem, sitting no problem, working and sleeping no problem, everything's fine. So tell me one good reason why I should finish this retreat. Then Kunsim said just one sentence, for all beings. Bam! Pick up the phone. So landmarks are for you. Practicing is for all beings. So don't worry, just do it. More questions? Yeah.
Common people's aha moment. Common people's aha moment and different monks element. What was it?
It depends what gives you the aha.
Aha moment.
If we see the same billboard on the street, you say aha, I say aha, same. But your question is a little bit childish, so what's your real question? 아이고 무섭다. So funny. So this aha moment, what does that really give you? If you talk about awakening or some kind of opening experience, we really do not concern ourselves with the experience, like landmarks or whatever you think happened to you. The result is what's important. You see this, oh, and then your life turns into ruin. What kind of aha was that? We don't know, but you see your life afterwards. Or you have a big aha, you become a very nice person because you finally understood something. We see the result. So the experience itself is not so important. Now, many people are attached to satori in Japanese, or getting enlightenment or awakening, or all these things, and it can serve as an inspiration. Because as I said in the introductory, one of the biggest dangers is that when somebody gets this really deep experience, next moment there's a reflection, I got it. That moment they lost it. So this aha, can you say aha 2 seconds later? Then it's okay. So any kind of experience, no problem. What kind of mind do you have during all that? That is the real question. All right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Last 2 questions. Sure, sure. Then it's 2A.
I don't know about the state of mind. Mind will be connected with the body, and sometimes we face attitude. How can we practice this one? Okay? This one, let it be, or hold the flow. But sometimes the others decided that he's absent-minded or some crazy. Or I think some troubles or some problems will be, I give up, I abstain from the problem. Then I think there's in brief the 3 attitudes: hold the flow, or give up, or absent-minded.
Or let it be. Not absent mind is different. Let it be.
Let it be.
Yeah, let it be.
And difference between the 3 kinds of mind is there?
Sure, sure. Actually, let it be happens to you anytime you board the KTX. Do you remember the music that you hear? It's the adaptation of the song Let It Be with Korean orchestration. It's beautiful. Joke aside, when you let it be, you don't do anything. But you should also see the consequences of not doing anything. Going with the flow is actually you follow others' actions, you follow together action. And they asked Master Sung San once, "Sir, how do you keep your direction when you go with the flow?" Then he says, "I go with the flow, but my head is above the flow." Remember that? Okay, what was the third?
Absent mind.
Well, absent mind is when you distract yourself and you're not in the moment. Like your body is here, but your mind decides to think about your holiday place in Chirisan. And then suddenly your mind is divided because a part of it operates your eyes and ears and breathing, but most of your concentration is in your Chirisan dacha, in your holiday place. So that's what we call absent mind. And sometimes it can be so strong that you actually don't hear what the others are saying. And that's valid for any. Absent mind can be really, really, really strong. especially when we chop up our focus and lose our concentration and we lose the moment. That's why I'm saying this moment is the only thing we've got. You lose the moment, you lose everything. So absent-minded is actually more dangerous than anything else because you lose everything. You cannot perceive, you cannot choose. If there's something you have to really do, you cannot do. Most accidents happen because of being absent-minded. So where the body is, that's where the mind should be. That's what we say, become one. Not just refrain from dualistic thinking, then this one mind appears. The other aspect of becoming one, body and mind, same place, same time. Don't be absent. And when you are present, this kind of presence is kind of good for other people too. It's reassuring, it's positive, it's radiating, it's very good. When somebody is absent-minded, you look into their eyes and you don't see anything. It's just not there. They're just whack, somewhere else. Okay? More questions?
As I understanding your Dharma talks, today's Dharma talks, I think I don't attach to dualistic mind. Mind always works dualistic way. And I think I'm considering about my life. I think if I want to solve some problem, I have to confront dualistic thinking. I have to go through dualistic thinking. But as I understanding from this Dharma talk, do I have to avoid this dualistic mind, just chanting or just Hido, and not confronting any terrible problem? Like I have to confront now. So what is the point? I can understand that point.
Let me ask you something. What would happen if you had a television in your living room which you cannot turn off? You would be terribly disturbed, right? Because there would be some kind of broadcast always, all the time. So if you couldn't turn off your mind, and it would be always thinking, always making these dualistic images and thoughts and feelings and perceptions, impulses, consciousness, it wouldn't be really good after a while. And let me tell you, that's why we have to sleep. That's why you have to kind of knock out your awareness or our awareness so that we could rest. The dualistic consciousness, of course, keeps working. We call that dreaming. And by that, we digest some of our karma. You said something very interesting. You said, our mind always works in a dualistic way. But that involves, if you apply dualistic approach to what you said, that sometimes it works like that, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. But
then right away, this one mind can appear as one of the options. One of the options of your mind's function is that it just reflects clearly, without any duality. When you see, when you hear, when you taste, smell, touch, and later on also think, you do not have to have dualistic background in your mind. You do not have to have good and bad. I'll give you an example. What color is this Buddha statue behind me?
Dark gray. Yeah, dark gray.
Gray?
Dark
We have to
gray.
adjust the color space somewhere. What color? It's brown. Brown. So when you see that, we got to the point, when you see that, it's just a reflection. Okay? It doesn't have any dualistic quality in it. It's a perception of color. So that moment, when you saw that, your mind wasn't dualistic. It was like a mirror. You understand this point? Now, if you understand this point, or you will digest this point somehow, then you see that confronting problems that does not necessarily mean that you have gain and loss, good and bad, me and others in your mind. You simply reflect the problem as it is, involve everyone or everything in it as it is in your consciousness. You don't chop anybody and anything off. You don't make good and bad any kind of opinion in your mind. In fact, it's essential for problem solving. To solve a problem, dualistic thinking is most of the time unsuitable. In the short run, it gives a very, very radical solution. But in the long run, it perpetuates the problem. Look at wars. Many nations and many leaders believed that if they kill those whom they don't like, it will bring some solution. And it never does. It never does. So why not confront the problem with a non-dualistic consciousness, which involves and includes everybody and everything? And then we can solve it much, much better, much, much longer term. So it was actually a very good question what you asked. That when you confront the problem, do you have to use your dualistic thinking or not? And the answer is no. You can use thoughts, but don't establish your solution on dualistic categories. European history, also sometimes Asian history, gives you very good example. So if you have a very strong dualistic solution, it comes back later as a homework, as a big homework. Okay? Yeah. So when we train, when we practice, especially our Chamson Bulgyo, our Korean Son Bulgyo, we have Kongans. Kongans are these Zen stories like Joju visits two hermits. He asks the first, did you get it? The hermit shows his fist. Joju says, the water is too shallow, I cannot stay here. He goes to the next hermit and says, did you get it? That hermit also shows his fist. Joju bows to him and says, you truly attained awakening, you are free to give or take, etc., etc. So, respectively, affirmative. Question out of this. Why did Joju approve of one but not the other? So if you use your dualistic mind to try to solve this problem, you put yourself into a wheel. Your thinking becomes an infinite loop. Always, all the time. You think about it, but there will be no logical solution, no rational solution whatsoever. And you go into the interview room once, twice, 3, 4, 10, 100 times, and you frustrate yourself if you're attached to it, if you use dualistic thinking to solve it. So Kongans are actually the way to decrease or take away the habit of establishing a problem solution on dualistic thinking. Because you cannot solve Kongans with dualistic thinking. Impossible. Then you apply this method, this kind of approach, this clear mirror approach, this wholly inclusive approach in other areas of life, and you'll get very different solutions. Okay? So it was an excellent question, and I hope that all of us will be practicing with this one mind, attain this clear mirror consciousness, keep on the path no matter what, and then our problem solving will be helping all beings to attain awakening and not reproduce suffering on this earth. Thank you very much for your attention.